You're listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries. On this edition of LibraryCast, we feature the winner of this year's Frome Festival short story competition, Elizabeth Pratt. And I'll be talking with her about her winning short story, Peace Offering. Welcome to LibraryCast. Elizabeth, tell us a little bit about the story. Did you write it specially for the Frome Story competition?
No, I didn't write it specifically with a competition in mind. I had an idea, and like many things, it sort of came to me and wouldn't leave me alone. And I toyed with it and played with it. And then finally, I think I nailed it. I got it to a point where I was happy with it. And then I started sharing it. I shared it first with a very small feedback group that's part of my local writers circle here in Swansea, the Swansea and District Writers Circle. And they're very supportive and very encouraging to all members and to people who come along. So I tentatively shared it with this small group of writers and got feedback on it, and it was mostly positive feedback. So I took it away, and then finally it seemed to be a good matter of timing. It came up just as I was looking through competitions. I saw the Frome Festival competition. I was a little intimidated, but I thought I'm going to go for it. I'm going to go for it with this story because it has been waiting for its moment, I think. And I thought I might be in there with a chance. So I thought I'd give it a go. Glad I did.
It's a very poignant, powerful story that really sort of sweeps you from behind in a way. It starts off very slowly. And I was picturing this man called Bob, trying to wonder what he looks like. And this woman who really didn't want to talk to anybody. That's how you lured in. Leave me alone. I'm in my own thoughts, in my own space. And my first impression was they were on the Empire State Building in New York, looking at the Chrysler Building. And then I'm reading the story and getting to the end, and spoiler alert, there's no spoiler in this story. I'm wondering, they weren't there. Can you sort of set the scene? Where are they? And that meeting when they first meet, how do you think Bob is feeling when he first meets this woman? And what he is thinking he's going to say to her as an introduction?
I think he's frightened, if I'm honest. I think he's completely unsure. I think he's out of his league, and he knows it. He's not experienced in this kind of thing. And he approaches her with an idea that maybe just being himself will be beneficial. Maybe it will do something. Maybe if she sees him as another human being that has problems and issues and is honest, that she'll respond positively to him. I think he is frightened. He's taking a risk, and it's a big risk because there's a lot to lose. But he just has a sort of inspiration that he's going to just be himself and be honest.
So they're high up, looking across the Chrysler Building, and there's a wonderful description of the building and the traffic and the noise that goes on that we imagine in New York. I get the impression you might know that part of the world reasonably well.
My mother lived for a long time in Manhattan and worked as a secretary and at one point was a Rockette dancer, which is an amazing little bit of backstory. And I've been to New York a lot of times. I've stayed there with my sister who ran a art gallery. So one of the things that I've always loved about New York is that most people around the world imagine it to be this huge, huge city, and it is. But the island of Manhattan, where all the skyscrapers really are, is remarkably compact. And you can see so much on a good day. There is smog and, city pollution and things. But on a good day, you can see so many iconic buildings and the history of it. The history of New York and the whole personality that the city has. It has its own character, obviously. I think every city does, but New York is like no other city, and I do love it. It has problems like anything, but that makes it more like a person to me. It's got its ups and downs. It's a beautiful place, and I haven't been back in quite a long time, and I miss it. But things change, you know. I love London too, for many of the same reasons.
Absolutely. So Peace Offering, a time you just drop in, it seems to me. You're dropping in little clues to this story. It unfolds very slowly and then speeds up towards the end, as most stories do. But you're talking about time of day. Midway through the story, there's a sort of conversation of it being nearly sunset. The lights are starting to come on, so you're getting this beautiful panorama of New York and the traffic, and a description by Bob of volcanoes. And you've also got a discussion of Bob talking about being high up and talking about the Mohawks not being scared of heights. So you've got these little nuances, these little, shall we say, hors d'oeuvre to the story that creates the finished tapestry at the end. Was that deliberately planned?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think it's almost like a detective story. It's not fair if you don't give the reader all the information, but it's up to you, the writer, how you weave that information in. And I'm a reader myself, obviously. I love to read, and I like a story that has hints, that has clues, that leaves a little trail. And even if that trail comes to nothing, you almost don't notice because they're so subtle. And that's what I was trying to do, was just put bits of information in, because I thought, if somebody reads this again, I want the whole story to be there, but I need it beneath the surface. So the surface story is interesting enough, but there's something else going on, and I don't think it's fair not to give clues. And I also don't think it's fair. I think it spoils things somewhat if it's too obvious, if it's too emotional, if it's too over the top. I needed it to work on a few different levels, and I was playing with it as a writer, as I do sometimes when I'm reading other people's work. You look for little subplots, kind of. And in a short story, it's really hard to do that. So I'm so pleased that I seem to have managed it, because it's very difficult to make subplots and little backstories inside a 2,000 word piece. I mean, I'm quite proud of myself, and I usually try to be, very humble, but in this instance, I have to say I am quite proud that I managed to pull it off. It's hard to do, and I enjoy it as a reader. I enjoy it so much when I find a story that does that. I'm just so pleased to have produced something that other people got that same thrill from. Yeah, I'm going to keep working on, different stories. But I do think it's fair to leave a little trail, to let people know that something else is going on. If they choose not to pay attention to it, that's fine, but it's there.
So Bob is creating a relationship, a story, just of a first meeting. And he comes across as a person that may well be, you would find at a party, that you may think is a champion of dad jokes. Someone that
Exactly.
may be somewhat, a little bit loud, a nice guy on the whole, someone that you may not want to initiate conversation, but when you do, you actually realise, I quite like you. And actually, you have got a heart of gold. He has a heart of gold, Bob, doesn't he?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I think the story goes from being about loneliness. It's about needing to make a connection, feeling alone, and needing to make a connection of any sort. And I think Bob, as I say, at first when he approaches it, he's probably quite frightened. He doesn't know how to make connections with other people. He's just a bloke. He's just a guy trying to do his best, and he decides to go with honesty, and he decides to go with a natural, friendly approach, and he's trying to make a connection. But ultimately, the story is about hope. It's about connecting with other people, and this common thing that we all have, which is life. We're trying to do our best in very difficult times, and some of us have it harder than others. But I think Bob is the kind of character that can see. He's the kind of man that can understand somebody's pain. He's empathic. He wants to help, and that makes him a good man. His very heart is all about trying to help somebody in need, and make a connection. It is about loneliness. He obviously feels his own pain and his own he's lost, he's suffered loss, and he's suffered loneliness, but he's trying to do the best he can. And I think that speaks to all of us, because what else can we do? We do the best we can.
So you've got the story of Bob, who shares quite a lot of his life and the
Mm.
differences between his first and second wife in the story. And the main character is not that interested, very suspicious, quite dismissive, and yet
Mm.
is very slowly drawn in by this good chap that Bob really is. And to me, the ending of the story, without spoiling the ending, is very much overcoming the heights of life, the steep climb we have in life. Was that a deliberate way of bringing that in through the Mohawks' lack of fear of heights? And also, is that a real fact? Because I didn't know
Right.
that.
It's really interesting, actually. I find it so anyway. The truth is that in the 1930s, and even earlier, there were small groups of Mohawk people, Native American Mohawk tribe, and others, the Choctaw, I think, were involved. And they were steel workers, and they were specifically brought on to construction crews because they didn't seem to have a fear of heights. Now, there was a man who arranged all these work groups, and he told people, as part of a legend, that the Mohawk were not afraid. They didn't consider heights were a thing. That the the everlasting the afterlife was all full of heights and lows, and it was some spiritual thing. Well, of course, that was basically nonsense. The Mohawk were strong people, and they were brave, but they believed in heights, and they knew full well that falling from a building would kill you. What they simply did, which I thought was the fantastic part of the story, is that they just got on with it. They knew the height was dangerous. They knew they were in a dangerous position, but they just got on with it. And because they did so calmly and, casually, they got a reputation for being completely unafraid. And of course they were afraid. They just were careful. And when I first read that story, when it was some article about the steel workers of early New York, I read it and I thought that of course they were afraid. And isn't that what we say, what true bravery and courage is not being afraid. It's doing something anyway. So I liked that. I liked the tie-in with the characters in the story. Of course they're afraid. Bob's afraid, but he does this anyway, because what else can you do? And I just thought that kind of tied in nicely with the Mohawk workers. Yeah, they climb to the top of the building, and yeah, they walk out onto these scaffolds, and they're terrified, but it's a job, and they're good at it, so they carry on, and they're well paid, hopefully. But yes, I think the Mohawk part was important because of that fable about not having fear. We all have fear. Everyone has fear. There are things that are terrifying, but the important part is that we gather ourselves together and do it anyway. And I just liked the way it tied in with the characters, really.
It's created a very nice ending to the story, but there's so much ambiguity in your story. What happens next? The ambiguity, I'm wondering is it deliberate? And then the second part of my question is, I'm just wondering whether or not you would have liked to expand this into a novelette or a novel itself. Is there more you could be doing with the story if you weren't in a short story competition?
It's an interesting question. I think that the ambiguity is somewhat important, because I invite a reader to take the story in any way they like, and I wrote it with hope in mind. I wrote it with the idea of a connection made and hope. And I wanted the story to end hopefully, and positively. But if somebody wishes to carry on with the story in their own minds and make their own ending, they're more than welcome to. I think that 2,000 words works well for it, because it sort of gets in there, it makes its point, and then goes away, and that's it. And you can decide, you can decide, what happens immediately after. That's fair enough. But for me, it ends hopefully. I had to have a hopeful story because of the subject matter, as it can be a bit dark. Some of the sort of, we talked about things under the surface. When I was bringing this to a feedback group, people talked about a story under the surface. And I recognized that there are dark undercurrents to Peace Offering. There's something going on there that could be taken to be quite depressing really. But for me, it's a story about hope and positive change and making connections and getting over loneliness. So yes, the ambiguity is important, because I don't want to tell a reader exactly. No writer wants to tell a reader exactly what to think. I want people to interpret it. I want people to apply their own experiences in life and hopefully see the hopefulness of it, to see that there's always an upswing. There's got to be a silver lining, whatever. It's a hopelessly optimistic story in that way. But yeah, I want to write happy things, So if people choose to think of the ending as something else happened, that's their business. I'm trying not to give too much away, because I do want people to be able to interpret it as they wish. But for me, it is about hope. I wouldn't want to expand past the ending, but I wouldn't mind writing her story, either character's story, before this little story came up. I think that I could apply a lot of her characteristics to other characters. They probably won't be the exact same character.
It's interesting you've written really about two main characters in the story. One we know quite a lot about, one we know through just little hints and clues. But what we don't know is her name. Do you have, you don't need to tell us, but do you have in your own imagination a name for her that helped you to bring out the character that is this woman who meets Bob?
That's another interesting question. I do often start stories with the character's name, and if I don't have the exact name, I have a name similar to it. So I'll explain. In Florida, for example, if I were to have a character that were from Southern America, she might be called Deborah Jean Haskell. Just a common name, just any kind of name, but it's important that she's called Deborah Jean, and then I would bring about her character and think she never gets called Debbie. She hates Debbie. Maybe she had a row with a girl called Debbie at her school. So she's always Deborah, but then her mother calls her Deborah Jean, and they're very close. And then I build the family around her. So she's Deborah Jean Haskell. And then if I find that that's actually a name of someone, I don't know, if maybe I saw it in an article and it just plugged in my brain, I change it. Then she's called Deborah Jean Soskell. I change it. I like the way things sound, and I speak them aloud an awful lot. Not in a strange compulsive way, but I repeat the name to myself, and I think and also the way that the words look on the page is important. For this character, she does have a name, a type of name, I should say. I don't know her exact name, but I know what sort of name it is. And I can't explain that any further. Hopefully, if there are writers listening, they will know what I mean. You do name your characters. I think you refer to them as something. Bob is Bob. I don't know his surname. I don't think he needs one. He is Bob, and which I chose specifically because it is a normal name for a relatively normal guy. He's very, some would call it boring. He's quite a dull guy, really. He just does what he does, and he's a happy-go-lucky sort of fella. But he's not a risk taker necessarily. He's a common man, and his name is Bob. Not Robert. That's too highfalutin. He's just Bob. So yeah, in that way, I do think about my characters' names. I think names are important.
I'm really glad you just said what you just said, because in your story is the word highfalutin.
Yes,
and I just want to hear you say it again. It's a lovely word. What does it mean? I just love hearing it. And it's really great that you've actually mentioned that word. It's in the story.
Such a brilliant word. I try not to overuse it. In fact, I think this is the only story I've used that word in. But words are just amazing, aren't they? And it's wonderful when you see a word written and you have no idea how it's pronounced. And this, for me, it's like a quest to hear someone say the word, especially if it's a very unusual word that you won't likely hear. You try to trick people into saying it, or try to find some script that an actor will say it aloud, because you don't want to admit that you don't know how it's pronounced. But highfalutin is one for me that has stuck in my mind, because when I was growing up, I always thought it was highfalutin, as if you were highfalutin, as if it were a verb, and I had no idea what it meant. But it sounds like what it is, doesn't it? Highfalutin. It sounds like someone who's a little bit too big for their, britches, someone who's showing off, some ostentatious kind of person. And I do love highfalutin as a word. But there are other words that stick in my head, and hopefully I don't litter them all over my work. But I think this is the only time I've used that word.
You're listening to LibraryCast with Somerset Libraries, and delighted to congratulate Elizabeth Pratt, for her winning story for the short story competition of Peace Offering. And it's a most incredible read, and I'm left wondering what happens in the end. And the only way people can actually find out what happens is by reading it, but then using your own imagination, as you mentioned, to conclude the story. Thank you so much for sharing the story with us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I just wanted to finally finish on talking a little bit more about your stories. You've written this winning story and you're planning a novel. Tell us a little bit about your novel and where we can find more about your pseudonyms that you've mentioned earlier, plus the writings of Elizabeth Pratt in short stories for the Frome Festival.
Well, I've written the short stories under Elizabeth Pratt, and Peace Offering has been under Elizabeth Pratt. I have another name, which is a combination of my mom's name, in a way to honor her. She was always very supportive of my writing and very encouraging, and I want to be like that to other people as well. So I write under Elizabeth Ardith Aylward, which is the name that I'm writing a novel under. My novel is a possible future of the Americas, not just the United States or the US, but where the future might see the Americas and what might happen. And it's about a group of people who are trying to get by and survive. And it's not depressing or discouraging, so I never call it a post-apocalyptic or anything. It's just a possible future. Science fiction, I suppose, but it is realistic. And I'm having fun writing it. I'm really having fun writing it. So hopefully it will be out next year, 2021, I'm hoping. And then I can start shopping it around, as they say. But in the meanwhile, I'm very pleased to continue entering competitions and readings for festivals and things. I've enjoyed that so much. It's given me such confidence to carry on. And I really hope that other people feel encouraged to try their hand at short story writing. It's not easy. But it is so rewarding, and it is incredible to be able to tell an entire story in just 2,000 words, 2,500 words. It's amazing. It's a great feeling when you win something, and I'm so honored to have won the Frome Festival.
What advice would you offer to a first-time contributor to the Frome short story competition?
What advice I give is basically just write it. I don't worry about if it feels like it's a weird story or that it doesn't sound like any other story you've heard. That's probably a good thing. Don't be afraid of different topics. If you have an interest in science fiction, write science fiction. You know, don't shy away from topics that are just odd, you know, fantasy stories, science fiction stories, anything that sparks your interest and gets you motivated to write about it. If you have an idea for a character that feels like there might be a story there that you could get into, then go for it. Absolutely go for it. And the other thing, obviously, I think I tell this to anyone who's interested in writing any sort of work, is read. Read, read, read. Not because I think you should copy other people's work or that you should, you know, emulate someone's style or rip somebody off, but because there is so much good stuff out there. And when you see the power, when you feel as a reader the power of what a story can do for you, you realize what it is that you're trying to do when you write. You want other people to feel that same thrill, no matter what kind of story it is. It could be a horror story. It could be, you know, something really terrifying. You want other people to be excited by reading and share a story. So no matter what it is, no matter what the topic, I think read other authors, read other people from different cultures, from different backgrounds, from different countries, and just read as much as you can, and then have a go at it. Just try to write something that thrills you. If you like what you're writing, chances are people will like what they're reading. Have fun.
Elizabeth Pratt, winner of the Frome short story competition for her short story Peace Offering. I wonder if you'd read us a short excerpt from your story, Elizabeth.
Thank you. All right, we'll take it from the middle. The sun is just going down, and this is the time I was waiting for, watching the lights of the place come on, almost one by one, sparking to life and changing the landscape of the whole city. He falls silent for a while, watching with me, like it's why we're up here. The Chrysler building lights up and he points as if I don't see it, as if we're in a canoe along a riverbank and he's spotted a pine marten. He stays silent all that time and we just look. When the cars turn on their lights and the streets run with color, he smiles.
I have been in conversation with Elizabeth Pratt, talking about her short story Peace Offering, which was the 2020 short story winner for the Frome short story competition. To read the story in full and other stories from this year's top 3 prizes, why not visit their webpage, which is fromeshortstorycompetition.co.uk. And if you've been inspired and encouraged by Elizabeth's story and her information about how she put the story together and how you might consider writing a story for the 2021 competition, there's more details on the webpage. You've been listening to LibraryCast, brought to you by Somerset Libraries, bringing to you libraries from home.